Good afternoon, everybody. Good evening, actually. Well, not really. So today we have our Nitsanto Itahuila. We are learning from you, Mellon Fellow. His artist talk is going to start here. We had to change the time because of scheduling conflicts, but today we are starting at 4 p.m. and we have Shane Hendren, who's a multidisciplinary Diné Navajo artist, and with his work, he is going to be exploring and explaining what his purpose here at Diné College is. So we're very grateful to have you here. We also have food, and I'm Kayla Jackson, the Mellon Grant Coordinator. So I help put all of the fun artist talks and workshops that are happening here. And housekeeping notes, if you guys have any questions, hold them till the end, and I will be running around with a microphone. And we also have a raffling or door prize of some books that were previously donated by Dr. Gray Eyes and the president's office, late Monty Russell. We have, I think, 9 books to give away, so you see the box back there with a blank piece of paper. Please put your name and your community, and we'll be drawing for them at the end of the talk. And Shane will be sharing a slideshow presentation as well as a video at the very end. And I'm going to hand it over to Carla Britton, who is the Mellon Grant Manager.
Thank you, Kayla. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I regret the last-minute time change. There's biology class that needs to be in here at 6 p.m., so we moved up the time of Mr. Hendren's talk. So people will probably be coming in as we start, but that's okay. So thank you for being here. Please enjoy the good food, and I want to be sure to thank a few people who have really made this possible. This is an initiative sponsored by a grant to our college from the Mellon Foundation. The fellowship supports really prominent leading Diné scholars and artists who seek to return home here to the Navajo Nation's college and to live in residence with our college community. The fellowship supports both the research of the fellows as well as their outreach to our students and to our wider community. This event has been made possible through the leadership of the college. I want to especially acknowledge the support and encouragement of our late President Monty Russell, who really believed very strongly in this event. Dr. Andrea Christel, our Vice Provost for Research, and her team have continued to sustain these initiatives. Our Provost, Dr. Elisa Landry, has worked closely with us to see through these efforts. Dr. Hae-Sung Kwan, the Acting Dean of the School of Arts and Humanities, has also been very generous with his time and support for these events. I especially want to thank Ms. Kayla Jackson, our Mellon Fellow Fellowship Coordinator. Kayla is invaluable for bringing into fruition the vision of the Mellon Initiative and worked closely with Dr. Russell, with me, and the research team to make this possible. So she never loses sight that this effort is really to foster in our students a deeper appreciation of learning and a greater awareness of Navajo arts. So now just to turn briefly to an introduction for Mr. Hendren. It's really my pleasure to introduce him as our Mellon Visiting Fellow for the academic year 2025. We're very lucky to have Mr. Hendren here. He is an accomplished artist, a master metalsmith, a really recognized and prized Navajo jeweler. He's also a professional rodeo cowboy and a filmmaker. So Mr. Hendren was born into a ranching family in New Mexico. He grew up in a family which really instilled in him a very strong work ethic and a deep appreciation for the culture and traditions of his forebears. Interestingly enough, his grandfather raised world champion American quarter horses. From this early experience, Mr. Hendren is especially knowledgeable about Navajo ranching, about issues of livestock and rodeo, and he brings this knowledge to his art making. He is passionate about the long tradition and history of cowboy arts. He's also quite a skilled businessman with an understanding of what it means to make a living from art. So I think for all these reasons, we're very grateful to have him with us. I should also mention that he has a degree in museum management from the IAIA, the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe. He earned a BFA from the University of New Mexico and an MFA in studio arts from the IAIA. So while he's here at Diné College, I hope you will reach out and get to know him. He's going to be making some very interesting films focused on important Navajo voices, and we'll hear more about that. Just to give you an idea of some of the topics, he's going to be focusing on the revitalization of the Round Rock Trading Post, aspects of Navajo agriculture, art making, and perhaps rodeo culture. So we're very grateful to have Mr. Hendren with us, so please join me in welcoming him. Thank you.
I don't even have to do a presentation anymore. She just pretty much said everything. All I got to do is show you pictures. Yate, I'm a Kluga. My Nollies are Bilagana. My Che is Tohaglini. I was born in the sky between Shiprock and Gallup. I was born dead, and then I was resurrected in Gallup. So I've been on bonus time since day one. My great-grandfather was in Tohatchi at the time, and there was no telephones or anything back then. You guys are all spoiled. And he had a vision that I was being born in the sky as the plane was flying from Shiprock to Gallup. So he hitched up his wagon and he drove it to Gallup so he could sing over me because I was 3.5 months premature. So it's because of him that I'm here. And like she said, I grew up ranching. We still raise some cows and horses, and we have fun because life is short. You got to have fun. But anyhow, I'm going to get into it because we got a hard out at 6 o'clock. There's a biology class that wants to get in here and talk about amoebas and microorganisms and things like that. But I really want you guys, if you don't have food, I want you to get food. I want you to eat. I want you to make yourselves comfortable. I want you to come up with some really good questions. I don't want them to have to leave with any food, so you guys make sure you eat, and then whatever's left, I want you guys to make sure you take it with you. We don't want to have anything left behind. So I'm going to get started. So these are my grandparents. On the left is my Chan grandma, that's Wilford and Martha Holion Charlie. My grandmother is from Tohatchi, New Mexico, and my Che is from Valley Store between Chinle and Mini Farms, which is where my mother currently lives, and this is my nephew right here. He lives at Valley Store. And then that's my grandmother on my dad's side, Betty Lou Hendren, and my granddad, Jim Hendren. The thing about my grandparents, Jim and Betty, is my granddad was recruited by the BIA to have athletic programs in Indian schools. And one of the schools that he worked with was NCC when it was at Mini Farms. And he was one of the people that was responsible for taking the first Navajo Cowboys to the high school national finals and the college national finals rodeos in the late 60s and early 70s. He was one of the founders of the Rough Riders Rodeo Club when NCC was called. They were called the Rough Riders. I still have some of their original rodeo event vests and everything. An interesting connection is he grew up with Jim Shoulders, for any of you who are rodeo people. My granddad chose education and Jim Shoulders chose rodeo, but I think they both succeeded. This is my mom and dad on their wedding day. They were married at the Methodist Mission in Farmington. And then that's a picture of me and my siblings. my mom and dad, my brother David, my sister, me, my brother Haas, and my brother Philip. So one of the ranches I grew up on was the Star Lake Ranch, which is west of Pueblo Pintada. I don't know if any of you know where Pueblo Pintada is. It's in Eastern Agency in the checkerboard. It's an interesting situation because the family that I come from, we're at Tohatchi, but the place where we come from was never on a reservation. It was never on the reservation. So because of that, I always felt comfortable not being on the reservation because we were always taught that wherever you put your feet is where you belong. So this ranch was my Chan grandma's ranch, and then my mom and dad took it over. And at that time, we all raised red white-faced cattle. My great-grandfather worked for the railroad, and he was an ice cutter. So an ice cutter back in the day before refrigeration, they cut ice, and then they would put it on rail cars, and they would pack it in sawdust to keep it from melting, and then they would ship it to what were called ice houses all over the United States. And then they would pack that ice in there, and that's how they kept meat and stuff cool throughout the year. So he was seasonal. He was a seasonal worker, so he would ride a train up to the Great Lakes. He would cut ice in the wintertime, and he would save all of his money because before he would come back, he would buy bulls and rams because he wanted to improve his livestock. So he would take those bulls and rams that he bought, and he would put them on a train car, and he would ride with them from the Great Lakes all the way back to Gallup. And then when he would get to Gallup, he would take them to Tohatchi and then take them to whatever ranches he was going to put them on. So our history of breeding and raising livestock goes way back. My mom's a molecular biologist and organic chemist, and we'll get into more of how that affects things. But genetics has always been a really big thing in our family. It's always been about making the best of what you have. This is pictures from Chaco Canyon Ranch. I grew up mostly at the Chaco Canyon Ranch. Our family ranch at Chaco Canyon borders the monument on the south side and the west side. And ever since I was a kid, I drew. This is a drawing I did probably when I was maybe 10 or 11 years old, something like that. I went to high school in Moriarty, New Mexico, which is east of Albuquerque, New Mexico. When I was a kid, my biggest goal was I wanted to be the first Native American artist to be a member of the Cowboy Artists of America. I don't know if you guys know what the Cowboy Artists of America is. It was a bunch of cowboys who drew and painted, and they formed this organization back in the late 60s, and it was elite. It was an elite group, and you couldn't be a member back then unless you were an actual cowboy. So my goal was to be the first Native guy. Well, there's this other guy named Orland Joe who's an amazing sculptor. I don't know if you guys know who Orland Joe is, but he's Navajo and Ute, and he does phenomenal work. Well, Orland Joe got accepted into the Cowboy Artists of America before me, so I gave up on that. Because if you're not going to be first, what does Ricky Bobby say? If you ain't first, you're last. Anyhow, this drawing on the right is a drawing I did when I was in high school. So I was always drawing. I grew up, most of the places I lived growing up didn't have electricity or running water. We always had a house in town, and a house in town always had running water and electricity and everything. But we didn't have TV until I was like 10 years old. So I spent a lot of time entertaining myself. We grew up hunting. We grew up, just taking care of business. I mean, from the time we were little kids, we always were taught to take care of ourselves. And one of the things that I did for self-care was drawing and painting and things like that. So when I was in high school, I had a bunch of full-ride scholarships to go to ag schools in Texas and New Mexico and Kansas. And my mom and dad, they never pushed me to do anything. They never told me what to do. And I used to drive. My mom was pregnant with my sister at the time, and I would drive her from Moriarty to Santa Fe for her prenatal appointments. And one day when we were driving up there, she said, what are you going to do when you graduate from high school? And I said, I don't know, ride bulls, ride bucking horses, chase women, have fun, And she's like, well, I think you're going to live a lot longer than you think. She said, you need to think long term. And I said, really? What does that mean? Because I never really thought past the next calving season, We did everything according to the seasons, You calve them out in the spring, you sell them in the fall, you get one big check, and you stretch it. That's how it worked. She said, you ought to do something you're passionate about. And I give my mom a lot of credit because every summer at least every summer, my mom would take us to some metropolitan, Denver, San Francisco, Dallas, somewhere. And she would take us to the theater, she would take us to museums, she would take us to galleries, we would go eat in a fancy restaurant because, and these are my words, not hers, she didn't want us to be a bunch of hicks from the sticks. She wanted us to know how to navigate the world outside of these rural environments where we grew up. And I always loved museums. Museums really appealed to me. And as a kid growing up, I was lucky because my dad was a trader. And when we lived at Crown Point, I can still remember as a kid, people would come to our house at all different times of the day and night, and they'd knock on our door because they knew my dad would buy art, and they would sell him art. And then I saw what my dad did with it. My dad would take that art, and then he would go to the Grand Canyon gift shop, or he would go to Scottsdale, or he would go to Santa Fe, and then he would sell that art for more than what he bought it for. And then those people would sell that art for more than what they bought it from my dad for. And I learned very quickly that everybody was making money except the guy who made the art. It was, the light bulb went off. So I was driving my mom to Santa Fe one day, and she says, I hear there's this fancy art school in Santa Fe where all the famous Indians go. And I was like, okay, that sounds cool, whatever that means. She said we should check it out. It was the Institute of American Indian Arts. I didn't know anything about it. And so we go in there, and we go to the advisor's office, and they said, you got to submit a portfolio, you got to do an application, all these things. So the next time I brought my mom to her prenatal appointment, I dropped off a portfolio and I dropped off my application and everything, and I forgot all about it. Didn't think nothing about it. As soon as I graduated from high school, I went to Texas as fast as I could get there because my uncle and I were looking for another ranch, and I like this stuff. It's called grass, and they have it in Texas. Well, they used to have it. They still have it in some places. But I was looking for a place with grass because we were always trying to grow our operation and everything. And I was riding bulls and bucking horses and having a good time, and Texas was a good place to do that. So I went over there, and I worked for a couple of ranches over there. I used to do what's called fit and show cattle, like cattle that they show at the fairs and everything. I was a cow hairdresser is essentially what I was. But anyhow, I worked for a couple of ranches, and we went to, I think we were in Shreveport, Louisiana for the Angus Junior Nationals. And now this is, I know you guys have no concept of this, but there used to be phones that hung on walls, and you put money in them to call people. But you could do this thing called a collect call. You could pick up the receiver, and you could dial 0, and you could get the operator, and you give them the number you want to call, and then they tell the person on the other end of the line, we've got Shane on the phone, will you accept the charges? That's how you found out if somebody loved you. Because if they accepted the charges, they loved you because they were willing to pay to talk to you. So I called home one day, and my mom said, I got good news and I got bad news. And I said, all right, well, give me the bad news. She said, your horse got struck by lightning. I said, well, that's bad news. She said, I got good news, though. You got to be home in 2 weeks because you got accepted into that fancy art school. And that made me sad because I was having a good time in Texas. I was living the life. I was enjoying things. I was, never thought I'd see a bad day. But I'm the kind of person that when I make a commitment, I follow through on it. And I had applied to go to school, and I figured, well, I'll get this deal knocked out. So I went to the Institute of American Indian Arts. And when I got there, I had to make a choice. I had to declare a major. And I didn't want to be a starving artist. I have an uncle that's an amazing artist, but he's never got 2 nickels to rub together. One of the best artists to ever walk the face of the earth. But you don't know who he is because he didn't understand the business side of it. And to this day, he still doesn't understand the business side of it, and he still hasn't made any money from his art. So he became a plumber so he could keep his refrigerator full. It's a sad reality, but that's what he did. Well, I didn't want to be that. I didn't want to be a plumber one day. If I was going to make a living in art, I was going to figure out how to do it. So I realized if I was in the museum business, that's a guaranteed check, right? Get a check every 2 weeks if you work in a museum. So I studied museum management. And because I wanted to get back to Texas, I tried to get through that degree as fast as I could. First semester, I took 28 credit hours because some people say I'm a workaholic. I don't know what that means, but I like to work. So when I get to the Institute of American Arts, it was like this amazing experience. I had never been in an environment like that before. I'd never been in a situation where everybody around me was creative. And they were motivated by being creative. Everything they talked about was being creative. It was all about creativity. It was all about, what are you thinking of? What are you reading? What are you looking into? What are you studying? You know, I'd been hanging out with a bunch of cowboys, and all we talked about was which bulls were the ones to get on and which women to chase. You know, it was diametrically opposed. We did a little of that at school too, but anyhow. So when I get there, one of the first people that I latched onto was this lady on the top center. Her name is Manuelita Lovato. She's from Kewa, Santo Domingo Pueblo. She was a museum studies instructor. She taught mannequin making, and she taught restoration of artifacts and things like that. But she taught it from an indigenous perspective. So she taught us how to restore moccasins and things like that the way they did it in the village that she came from. It was one of the most enlightening things, because up until this point, my education had been entirely Anglo-Eurocentric based. You know, I grew up in a time in an environment where you were ashamed to be native. You didn't tell people you were native. It was one of them things, because if you couldn't fight, it was a bad deal. Some of these scars I have on my face are because I had to fight my way through life. Thankfully, things aren't that way anymore. But I come from a different generation. I was raised by guys who went to Vietnam. They didn't know how to do anything but fight. My Che went to World War II and Korea. So the men that raised me were hard men. And the way they settled a lot of things was with their fists. And it was just the way it was. It was a tough deal. And when you went off the reservation, if you were brown, you went right to the bottom of the totem pole. And you had to prove in every way that you were worthy of whatever it was you did. For me, I didn't like it. I knew I was smart. I knew I could work hard. I knew what my value was. So I wanted to get through with this degree so I could get on with life and prove that. The guy on the bottom left is Chuck Daly. He was the main museum instructor. I love Chuck Daly. Chuck Daly adopted 2 Navajo kids back when Anglos could adopt Navajos. And the interesting thing is, this was in the 60s. He and his wife were taken hostage by students at IAIA for adopting those kids. It was the most interesting thing, because he told this story. He was so proud of these students for doing this, because it was at the time when people were trying to fight for the rights for natives to keep their children. We're going through this right now. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but this is in Congress right now. We're dealing with this again, and this happened 50 years ago. So his students took he and his wife hostage to make their point. You know, why do these white people get to adopt Navajo kids? It was a very interesting thing. So what I found out very quickly was, they said, I got called into the registrar's office, and they told me, they said, Shane, you can't graduate unless you take electives. You can't just take museum classes. You have to take electives. And I said, well, what are electives? And they said, anything that's not museum. So they hand me this thing. I don't know if you guys even know what a phone book is. It's about as thick as a phone book. Had pages in it that you turn, and they said, pick anything in that book, it's a course catalog, that's not museum. So I'm fiddling through there, I'm looking through there. I grew up pre-Home Depot, which means if you needed gate hinges or you needed latches, you built them. Most of the ranches we lived on had forges. We worked iron. I was welding by the time I was 10. I knew how to work metal. My dad taught us how to build bits and spurs, all these different things. You made it. You didn't go buy it. You made it. That's how things were done when I was a kid, because you were too far away from anywhere. If your pickup broke down, you fixed it. There wasn't AAA. There wasn't cell phones. There wasn't a payphone on the Chaco Canyon Ranch. But anyhow, I had to take an elective. In the course catalog, they had these classes that were called Metalsmithing 101. It was something like small metal construction for small sculpture and jewelry. Well, I knew how to twist baling wire. I knew how to build a fence. I figured easy A. All I was looking for was an easy A, something to get through, right? Never thought that this would have any future benefits to me or anything like that. Well, Lane Coulter, this guy in the center picture on the left, and this is his wife, Jan Brooks. Lane was the metals instructor at IAI. And Lane was also the president of SNAG, which is the Society of North American Goldsmiths. And if any of you are silversmiths or jewelers, you need to join SNAG because they're hugely supportive of you. And they've been supportive of me. But anyhow, at the time that I was at IAI, it was transitioning from what it was, which was a BIA school, to what it is today, which is an independent school that is congressionally chartered. It's now a land-grant university. During that period of time, they had this situation where it was, they had two pots of money. It was spend it or lose it. So Lane, because of SNAG, he knew all these master metalsmiths. So what he did is he called them all in. And he said, hey, do you want to come teach for a week? Do you want to teach for a month? I'll pay you to come teach my students. So when I was at IAI, I learned from some of the best metalsmiths in the world and didn't even know it. I didn't even know what I had walked into because I never planned on working metal. The guy on the right is Bob Hausos. This is his sculpture. He's the son of Alan Hauser. He was one of the first people, when I was at IAI, I took a class with him. He was one of the first people, and then he later on was my instructor at UNM as well. But he was one of the first people to tell me, get paid. Know what you're worth and get paid. Get them to put it in writing. Don't sign the contract unless you get it in writing. Because of Lane Coulter, I got to work with guys like this. Alan Hauser, Harvey Begay, Michael Good, Al Joe. All these guys came and taught classes, taught seminars. A lot of you may not know this, but Harvey Begay is the son of Kenneth Begay, and Kenneth Begay was one of the original silversmithing instructors at NCC in Mini Farms. And he's the foundation. He was the godfather of Navajo silversmithing, modern silversmithing. If you don't know who Kenneth Begay is, you should know. I graduated from IAI. The very first job I got was for the Smithsonian Institute. I installed the first exhibit at the Museum of the American Indian in 1993 at 1 Bowling Green in New York City. I took my own crew from Santa Fe. It was the first time that natives ever installed their own artifacts for a Smithsonian museum. And we were challenged by the union. The union didn't want us there. They said they're not union, they shouldn't be doing this. We got a dispensation because we were considered cultural experts. That's how we got it done. I was living in the Twin Towers, and a lot of you won't remember this, but it was the first time they bombed the Twin Towers. It was a car bomb in the parking garage. They asked me if I would continue to work for the Smithsonian. I said, no, I'm going back to New Mexico where I can see my enemies coming. So I came back to Santa Fe, and that was when they were opening the new museum, which is now Mokna in Santa Fe for IAI. I had worked in both of IAI's museums, which is what you see on the bottom. It used to be the old federal building. It was the old FBI building in Santa Fe. I installed their first exhibit. I worked for them for a year. And then I realized that I wasn't cut out for bureaucracy. I was too independent, and I couldn't handle sitting around twiddling my thumbs. I had to be doing stuff. So I quit my job, and I walked across the street to the La Fonda bar, and this old cowboy, this old bronc rider that rodeoed with my dad, Gibson Nez, comes in and says, you sure pretty boy to be looking that sad. And he asked me what my problem was. And he was one of the guys that came in and gave us tutorials and everything. I learned how to make beads from him when I was at IA. He said, you went to that fancy art school. He said, come to work for me. So I went to work for him. Over the next 10 years, I probably made him over 1,000 beads. If you see a Gibson Nez necklace, there's a large percentage chance that I made the beads. The other reason I went to work for him is because I had a baby, and he said I could bring my baby to work. That was my priority. At that time, it was just about keeping the refrigerator full. I didn't know what I was going to do. I got this degree. I wasn't using it now. I was still riding bulls. I was still drawing pictures. I was not a silversmith. I was not a jeweler at this time, even though I was working for Gibson. I later went on to work for a guy from Germany, and I did a bunch of this Zuni-style channel inlay, buckles, bracelets, and everything. I didn't realize at the time I was ripping off the Zunis. All I cared about was I was trying to fill my refrigerator, and I probably made 1,000 of those Ranger sets. And I was selling them to a wholesaler in Santa Fe. And once again, I realized I had this one experience. The guy that I was working for said, Shane, you're too good. I can't sleep at night paying you what I'm paying you. I got to pay you more, and I can't do that. So I'm going to let you sell directly to the guy I'm selling to. So I went to this guy, and this is a really good lesson I learned. I learned it one day, and it changed my life. I walked in there with a concho belt I made, and I put it on the table. And the guy said, how much you want for it? I said, I don't know. I had no idea. He said, I'll give you $350 for it. I said, I'll take it. There was a lady there shopping. She was a shop owner. This guy was a wholesaler. And she asked him, she says, how much do you want for that contra belt? He says, $3,500. I was standing right there. And I looked at him, $3,500? And he's writing me a check for $350. Shoves the check at me and tells me to get out. I never did that again. It was the craziest thing. That's what they do in Gallup every day. So then I went back to UNM. My mom worked for the post office. She retired from the post office. I asked her what she was going to do. She says, I'm going to finish what I started, because she never finished college. She went back to UNM. I'm one of the few people who can say that I went to college with my mom. You never have a better wingman than your mom, guys. She'll never say anything bad about you. If you have a chance to go to college with your mom, do it. That's where I got my BFA. I learned a lot of stuff there, but I challenged things too. I challenged a lot of things. So these spurs on the bottom are a pair of spurs I made while I was at UNM. Because in sculpture class, I used to make stuff that was utilitarian, because they would tell me it's not art if it's utilitarian. And I called bullshit on them, because this was all Eurocentric, high art. They all wanted it to be abstract and undescribable and not make any sense, because the more confusing it is, the more bullshit you can spread on it, the more they love it. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's great. It's creativity. But I came from this environment. I came from this background where things could be beautiful, but they could also be utilitarian. My grandmother wove textiles, the most beautiful textiles in the world. Not only were they textiles, though, they held stories. They held meaning. They were these multi-dimensional items that transcended being an object. And that's what was the foundation of what I was doing. That's a Bob Housel sculpture there. He was involved in a great big lawsuit. He ended up losing, even though he had a contract. If you guys ever want to look up some art history, on the left. And this is Luis Jimenez. Both of these sculptures were installed while I was there. And this is an example of the type of jewelry I was doing at the time. A lot of mokomegane and everything. I was married. I had to get a divorce, which meant I had to get a job. My attorney said, you're never going to get custody of your kids unless you have a job. So I went to work for Intel. My attorney told me one day, you need a job. The next day I was working at Intel. I have 2 other degrees that Dr. Didn't mention. I have a degree in construction management, and I also have a degree in construction technology. I broke my jaw 3 times riding bulls. And the last time I broke my jaw, they wired my face together. And it was a pretty bad deal, so I decided to go back to school and finish off these other degrees, which I was finishing off when I went to work at Intel. I was an environmental health and safety engineer for Intel, and what I did is I designed and implemented safety policies and procedures for construction. I worked on 2 world record projects for them, Fab 11X and D1D in Oregon. I was the only native in management, and I was one of the youngest guys in management. It was the craziest thing to always walk into a room and you're the only brown person. It's not that way anymore, and it shouldn't be, because now you can get ahead on your merits. So when I was in college at UNM, one of the things I didn't mention is I did whatever I had to do. I worked for a roofing company. I used to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, go put roofs on houses, and then go to class in the afternoon. I was never allergic to work, but I always kept drawing. These are 2 of my favorite drawings, and ironically, I still own them. The one on the left is called Homemaker, and that actually won first place at the New Mexico State Fair a bunch of years ago. And a guy bought it, and just last year, he gave it back to me to give to my daughters. It was the craziest thing, because if you live as long as I do and you do business as long as I've done it, you end up competing against yourself. It's called the secondary market. So a lot of my jewelry ends up on the secondary market because a lot of my collectors have died twice already. So their kids don't want it or whatever, so they resell it. So not only when I go out into the market now with new jewelry am I competing with other artists, I'm competing against the work I made over the last 30 years. So it was really cool that this person gave me that drawing back. This drawing always causes controversy because the title is FBI and his Black Hoe. I love double entendres. So he's wearing a t-shirt. Back in the 90s, everybody used to wear these t-shirts that said either full-blooded Indian FBI or fry bread inspector or all these things. So I used to get a kick out of all the double entendres, right? So it was FBI and his black hoe. This is a hoe. My Che was a farmer. What did I do all summer? I hoed weeds. So I had a whole different perspective, right? And his spirit animal is the Playboy bunny. Because you should have fun. Art should be fun, right? Anyhow, in 2023, I graduated, or I'd gotten tired of Intel. It was a grind. It was a lot of, like I said, I'm not good with bureaucracy and everything. I like construction because you start a job and you end a job. You're working towards the end of something. But my kids were getting to the point where I wanted to be able to be with my kids more, and I work 12-hour days every day. And these big projects, there's no, you're married to the job. And my son had started roping and everything, and I wanted to be able to spend more time helping him and stuff. So I made a choice. I decided that I wasn't going to work for anybody else anymore. And I formed a corporation, Hendren Enterprises, and I started making jewelry full time. That's all I did. And I made a lot of bad jewelry. I burned the ships, as they say. This is some of my early work from that time period. I did a lot of mokomegane. Mokomegane, I'll show you a slide here in a minute. It's a Japanese technique. But I didn't ever want to do anything that was like what somebody else did, because I learned very quickly, if you made silver and turquoise jewelry, it didn't matter what your name was, because everybody made silver and turquoise jewelry. It was so hard to be competitive, and it was so hard to make a living. I figured out very quickly that you had to differentiate yourself. You had to make yourself different. You had to make something that people could recognize. Mokomegane is a Japanese metalsmithing technique that I learned when I was at IAI. Mokomegane, literally translated, means wood grain metal. I used to love to make stuff at IAI, and then I would come back here to the reservation and visit my Che and show him what I made. So I was making this mokomegane. I'm the first person to ever produce mokomegane at the Institute of American Arts. So I come back, and I'm showing it to him. He says, "Do you know where you saw that before?" I was like, "I've never seen this before." And he pulls his footlocker out from under a bed, and there's these katanas in it. They're these little short swords that the Japanese officers carried. My Che was a Marine. He was a tunnel rat in the South Pacific during World War II. If you guys don't know what that is, look it up. It's a very ugly job. We've seen his Marine Corps file, and it's redacted so much it's practically completely black. That's how much bad, nasty shit he did. He had a Japanese wife. When the war ended, he was so messed up, they didn't want to send him back to the United States because they thought he'd become a mass murderer. So they sent him to Tokyo. He was the only native that was an MP at the war trials. He spent 3 more years in Tokyo, where he ended up marrying this Japanese woman, and they had a daughter. So when they finally decided that mentally he wasn't going to kill all of Los Angeles when he got off the boat, they let him go home. But as he gets to the boat, they said, "You can go, but she can't." He said, "Yeah, but she's my wife." They said, "Well, on this piece of paper, you have a wife, Martha Charlie in Arizona." He said, "Yeah." He said, "I have 2 wives in Arizona. I'm a Navajo. I can have as many wives as I can afford." But the Marine Corps said, "Uncle Sam don't see it that way." So he had to leave his wife and child, and his wife was pregnant at the time. So all we've got is this picture of her. But because of that, because I made that mokomegane, he finally opened up about some of his experiences in Japan and everything, and we got this whole different connection because of it. And to this day, I still make mokome. I make it to honor him. I make it to honor what he did, because he did a lot of nasty stuff so that we could be here today having this conversation. And I hope none of you have to do the kind of things that he did. I was doing a lot of shows, and after a show or whatever, everybody would sit around, shoot the shit, talk about business and everything, and everybody complained. Everybody complained about how the market was. Everybody complained about the business. Everybody complained about the wholesalers. They complained about the galleries. They complained about all this stuff. Well, I was raised that you don't bring a complaint to a table unless you bring a solution. My mom and dad always said, "You come to the dinner table and complain, buddy, you better have at least 3 things that you think you can do to fix that. You better bring something to fix it." And that's how I've always been. This organization was formed in 1974. It was called the Indian Arts and Crafts Association. It was the only association in the world that was made up of artists, gallery owners, curators, museums, collectors, wholesalers, retailers, suppliers, and it was international. It was the only group of its kind. It was formed to combat Asian imports in the 70s. The Asian imports were so bad, they were trying to figure out how to stop it, right? And that's why they formed together. I joined the board because I wanted to figure out what I could do. What could I do to change things? How could I help other artists make more money? I was later elected president. I was president of the education fund, and then I became president of the organization at one point. And under my tenure, there's two things that I'm really proud of. I used to initiate these things called the Business of Art seminars. So at every wholesale show we would have a Business of Art seminar where we'd put on these classes to teach artists how to treat what they did as a business. Because I wanted everybody to succeed. I wanted you to have more money in your pocket at the end of the day than you started with. The other thing we did is we heavily lobbied to change the Indian Arts and Crafts Act. The reason why they're able to prosecute now is because of all the lobbying we did in Washington, in Santa Fe, in Phoenix. And because of that, I had death threats against me for a number of years. It's a very interesting thing. I did not get a job during the recession, 2008. I could see it coming. There had to be a collapse happen at some point. My kids all rodeoed, I rodeoed and everything. And this is one thing I will say, cow people take care of cow people. It's this weird thing. So I started a buckle company, Hendren buckles, because at the time I didn't like the buckles my kids were winning. They were cheap, they fell apart. I didn't like it. At one point I had 6 people working for me full-time in my buckle company. We were going and blowing. I started getting phone calls from a guy in Mexico. He said, Shane, he said, let me make your buckles. He said, I'm already stealing your designs. He said, we'll just put your name on it. And then they started making buckles for $80 because they're using free labor in a prison down there. So 90% of the rodeo buckles you see, they're made by brown people that are incarcerated in Mexico. Yeah, that's why they're $80. I still make buckles, but I only make custom buckles now, like the 2 on the bottom. That was a memorial buckle. My son passed away in 2020, and they had a memorial, that was for a memorial bronc riding they had for him. But I built spurs and stirrups, and if any of you watch Team Open, know Jojo Lamone, the first year he qualified for the NFR, a good friend of his ordered them stirrups for me. He rode those stirrups at the NFR that year. Jojo was a great guy. He's native, by the way. I'm going to go through real quick and just kind of, because we're running out of time. Somebody's telling me, hurry up. I'm going to go through these things so that you can just see some of the work I've done. So these are all vessels and pots. These are all holoforms. And I was already making them, but my son and I were both part of this. This is a catalog on the left from Old Traditions and New Pots. It's a show at the Heard Museum that happened in 2007. And then I'm also in this book, Master of Contemporary Indian Jewelry. This book still causes controversy. I've never called myself a master. This book said I was a master. And you'll find a lot of people out there who love to say, I'm not a master. Well, you know what? I might not be a master, but I'm pretty damn good at what I do. I spent a lot of years working my ass off to be as good as I am, and I'm not going to back up to anybody and say that I'm not good at what I do. You don't work 30 plus years at something and hang your head. My grandfather was a Marine. That's one thing he never tolerated. He always said, you hold your head up, you put your chest out, and you be proud of who you are. And don't back up to nobody. You might have to fight your way through it, but it's a good way to be. In 2012, so part of being part of the Indian Arts and Crafts Association, this is important right here, because this is a good tidbit of information for you guys. So because I was part of the Indian Arts and Crafts Association and everything, and because we were lobbying to change the Indian Arts and Crafts Act, I had gained access to the halls of government. And I was under Governor Bill Richardson in the state of New Mexico. He appointed me to his Native American Art Advisory Board. There was 3 of us, and I was the only Native. Ironic, isn't it? Native American Art Advisory Board, and there's only one Native. But while I was in Santa Fe working on this stuff, one of the things that I did, I don't know if you guys know what this is, but it's called 1% for the arts. Any construction project, big construction project, they take 1% of the budget money and it has to be held back for art, okay? Up until 2012, they had never spent any of that 1% for the arts money on the Navajo reservation. Our construction jobs on this reservation put money into 1% for the arts. So what we did is we worked on this project that ended up, this is a cairn that I built. It was a temporary installation that was at Chinle. And I love this cairn because it was the coolest thing. I built it, it was temporary, and I built it out of the objects that were there. And it was installed for, I don't remember how long. It wasn't a year, it was a while though. The most interesting thing was, part of the contract was I had to take the sculpture apart when I was done with it. And it was amazing the kind of stuff that people had put in there. People had built it bigger. People had added stuff to it. I found poems, I found prayers, I found all kinds of stuff in there. It's the wildest thing, you know? It was the coolest thing. It was amazing. But anyhow, the point I'm trying to make with that is a lot of art is not about the making of art. It's about the networking. That's the hard part. I'm not good at that. I'm an introvert. I'd rather be in my studio. I was also invited to speak at the International Turquoise Conference at the British Museum in 2012. This was very interesting because there was only 3 natives at the International Turquoise Conference. Me, Yazzie Johnson, and Gail Bird. It's ironic, isn't it? We're talking about Native American art and there's only 3 natives talking. It's another irony, right? I might talk about that more when I address her class, if she lets me. But anyhow, this is interesting because Doug Magnus was there. Doug is still a good friend of mine. Doug owns one of the oldest turquoise mines in North America, the Cerrillos mine north of Santa Fe. And one thing I like about Doug is the Kiowa people, the Santo Domingo people from there, he still lets them come and collect turquoise from that mine. Doesn't charge them a dime because that was their mine originally. And he doesn't mine it anymore because the turquoise is pretty much played out. But what he does now is you can rent his mine and you can go in there and have a dinner party and hire somebody to play the violin and everything. It's a pretty cool deal. These are beads I made. Like I told you, I learned a lot about making beads from Gips and Nez. And over the years, I've made all kinds of beads. I love to make different kinds of beads. Here's some examples of buckles and a concho belt I did. I do a lot of engraving. I love to engrave because I love to draw, but drawing doesn't pay what jewelry does. And so you guys saw that I used to paint and draw a lot. When I decided to do art as a business, as my sole business, I decided at that moment that I wasn't going to paint and draw anymore. Do you want to know why? Because a person only has so much wall space in their house. I'm not kidding you. They can only buy so many paintings and drawings. Now, really rich people, they rotate them. They have curators for their homes, and they'll have a whole different setup in the spring and a different one in the fall. 99% of people can't do that. So once their walls are covered, they're not buying no more paintings or drawings. Jewelry is an impulse purchase, depending on what the price point is. And a woman never has too much jewelry. That was one of the reasons why I went towards jewelry. Because I don't know about you guys, but my belly button's been real close to my backbone in my life, and I don't like that feeling. These are some bracelets I've done over the years. I took that technology that I learned early on of the Zuni style channel inlay, and I still do it. I still cut a lot of my own stones and everything. Some necklaces I made, some sets. This is important here. This is grasshopper turquoise. You can still buy it. It's available on a very limited amount. So because of everything I've done, I get miners that will come to me. And they'll say, Shane, I'll give you this turquoise to make jewelry for me if you'll enter it in these shows, because I do what's called building cachet for their stones. So if I use it, now it's validated in the marketplace. So there was a miner in Nevada who had this grasshopper turquoise mine. He mined it, got this really beautiful stone out of it, but nobody would buy it from him because it was this really bright green color. And they were like, oh no, nobody's gonna like that. Nobody's gonna want that. So he sold the mine. He went broke, so he sold the mine to another guy. This guy buys it, and he goes to a person that you'll see later on and says, do you know who I can get to make jewelry with this so that we can make it saleable? And they said, oh yeah, absolutely. So they gave me about a lot. They gave me a lot of turquoise. And they said, build jewelry with it. We're giving it to you. We just want you to build cachet. And that bolo won first at the herd, I think. So I was using it, and I was winning awards with it and everything. And boom, the price of that turquoise starts going up. People start buying it. So that guy starts mining it the next year. And this is the cool thing about mining. He's got his tractors going and everything. He's digging up the turquoise, right? He's digging, and there's no turquoise. And he's digging some more, and there's no turquoise. It was gone. So what's in the market is what's out there. There's a lot of, in Nevada, it's not worth mining anymore. That's how little turquoise there is there of this grasshopper. And I like to tell people that I used all the good stuff already. So I'm always experimenting. I'm always trying new things. I don't want to be stagnant. I don't like people, 10 years from now, I don't want to be doing the same thing I'm doing today. That's not a good life. You need to be changing things up and challenging things. This is a ring that I did that won the Judge's Choice Award at the Herd in 2016. This is titanium. I don't know if you guys know what titanium is, a very light metal. They build airplanes out of it, but you can anodize it. So using electricity, you can change the color of it. So I've engraved it and I've anodized it, but you can't solder it because it has an oxide layer on it that prevents it from being soldered. So the only way you can join it together, the way I made that cube, is I welded it with a laser welder. So you gotta be trying new technology by trying new things. This is chasing and repose that I learned from a guy from Italy whose family is credited with creating chasing and repose in the 1300s. So I went to the source. I'm always learning. I'm always trying to learn from other people. This is, I made this music, this is a music box. I made this music box to commemorate, and I don't have time to tell a story about an event my mom had with some sheep when she was a girl. But this music box is cool because it's the first time I ever did something with 3D printing. So this sheep on the top, I 3D printed that, and then I cast it in silver. The other thing that's cool about this box is I've used all these other techniques, but I engraved this entire box while it was flat, and then I welded it together, and I left the welds exposed. I welded it with a laser welder. You couldn't do that otherwise, because if you heated it up with a torch, then you're going to fire scale all that engraving, and it's going to throw it off. Only with a laser welder can you put it together. This is something I just did this year just before Christmas. I got a buddy in California who engraves cars and everything, and he's engraving these Hot Wheels, and he's like, go on, do it. So I engraved some Hot Wheels this year. I like to have fun. It always should be fun. This is another show I was involved in at the Herd Museum in 2022. This is a toothpick holder. So this vessel right here, which has sapphires and turquoise and amethyst in the flower and everything, it's made to hold toothpicks. Because when I was a kid, one of the things that I had the opportunity to do was be in people's houses that had money. And it was interesting to see they had the fanciest stuff. They had these silver things, and all they did was hold napkins. You know, it was crazy. You know, they had all this silver stuff to hold your toothpicks, they had these things called gravy boats. I used to love the name because it was this silver thing, and you had a big spoon that went in it to hold your gravy and everything. My gravy came out of a skillet. But that exposure allowed me to make stuff like this. I broke a lot of records in my life. That's one thing I'll take pride in. This is another reason why I don't back up to nobody. This necklace sold for $100,000. I broke every record in the Southwest for auctions. This was a fundraiser auction for at the Montezuma Ball in 2013. 100 grand for that necklace. One of the reasons why I've been successful is because I've had amazing mentors. One of my first mentors is that guy on the far side, James Little. If you guys don't know who James Little is, if you're a silversmith, you need to know who he is. James Little grew up, he was deaf. He couldn't talk. He didn't learn how to talk until he was an adult. And his grandmother only talked to him in Navajo, and she used to yell into his ear, And the way he learned was through the vibration from her putting her mouth on his face to yell at him. And all he did was herd sheep. He grew up in the middle of nowhere, herding sheep. He was deaf. He was written off. But this guy could make stuff. Like, he could make all kinds of cool stuff, right? And this person stumbled across him because he started making silver jewelry because he was just messing around. And she said, you know what? You're good. I'm going to help you. He went to Diné College when it was NCC at Mini Farms, and he studied under Kenneth Begay. So like I said, you need to know about this school because this school is foundational in what we do as artists. There's always these connections. There's always these relationships. Well, James Little, when I first started making jewelry as a business, he pulled me aside and he gave me all kinds of great advice. He told me what to do. He said, buy the best stones you can buy. Never sell yourselves cheap. He said, if you have to eat sardines, eat sardines. He said, but don't. He said, they're going to come to you on Sunday afternoon and they're going to try to get your stuff for as cheap as they can get. He said, don't sell it. Take it home. Take it home and take it to the next show. He said, just bite the bullet. He was right. Cheryl Ingram, Kathleen Sanchez, and Deanna Olson. They're still in business. They owned Silver Sun Gallery in Santa Fe. They were the first gallery to buy my work. They didn't know they were buying my work because I was making it for another person. But then when I started making jewelry myself, they were like, hang on, that looks familiar. I said, yeah, because I used to make so-and-so's jewelry. I still do business with them to this day. Kathleen and Deanna, the two Anglo ladies, they're retired school teachers who became millionaires from selling Indian art. They became millionaires. They're still millionaires from selling our art. It's a weird thing. And I give them a lot of credit because they're the ones that hooked me up with the grasshopper turquoise. They're the ones who said, and this is where it's important, it doesn't matter what you do in life. Treat everybody with respect. Treat everybody with kindness. We don't know what other people are going through. That's the reason why I have had the success I've had, because they recognized in me, I never badmouthed my first wife. I never talk ill of other people because I know that that just comes back to you. Ben Nighthorse Campbell is retired congressman and senator from Colorado. He's always been a business advisor of mine. He helped me when we were trying to get the Indian Arts and Crafts Act changed. He opened doors for me in Washington and Santa Fe and Phoenix, and he's still a advisor of mine. This is Shannon Campbell. She owns Sorrel Sky Gallery. She's the only person to have an Indian art gallery in Durango, Santa Fe, and now New York City. I worked for the last 7 years for Rio Grande, which is an international jewelry supply company. They still use my images and everything. The one thing I'm proud of is this center picture. In all the years that they produced their tools catalog, there was only 2 jewelers that were ever on the cover of their catalog, me and Saul Bell. And Saul Bell was the founder. I went to the Institute of American Indian Arts and graduated in 2023 in their MFA program. This is our cohort, our graduating cohort. And while I was there, that's when film work took off. This is an example of my installation. Here's another picture of my installation. I made 4 films that were part of this installation piece. I was going to show you one, but I'm out of time. They told me I'm out of time. So I'm going to rush through and get through with this. This is, the QR code will take you to my website. These are my contacts on Facebook and Instagram. I'm a descendant of Manuelito and Juanita. And this is the thing that is really interesting to me. When I was studying my MFA, and my mom is here now so she can vouch for this, I was doing my thesis on story making because we all know about storytelling, but story making is somebody had to start the story. Somebody had to make the story to begin with, right? There's always a story maker. Well, the books you're getting tonight are written by one of my relatives, and they talk about our family history and everything. And one of the things that my granddad, who was a history teacher, told me, he said history is his story. The guy who wins the war writes the book. So 90% of the stuff we see out there is his story. It's not our story. And at NTUA, or it's not NTU, right? Navajo Technical University, They have a PhD program in Navajo studies now. Diné studies, sorry. Well, in order to get a PhD in something, you have to have resource material, right? Where's that resource material come from? Because the books are not written by us. There's very, very few of them. So I encourage all of you, keep pursuing your educations, write the books. But that's the reason why I'm doing the films I'm doing here. Because the people that want to talk and they want to put their stories on camera, those oral histories, those stories are just as important, if not more so, than what's in the books. Because the family stories that we have about Manuelito and Juanita, they don't look like anything that you read in the books. Some of it's pretty grim, some of it's pretty exciting and fun. Juanita used to ride a donkey all the time. That was her mode of transportation. She rode an ass. So it's stories, I mean, things that most people don't know, but they're not in books. This QR code will take you to a recent article about me that was written by the Smithsonian Institute's Folklife magazine. It's not in print, it's only online. I'm told I don't have time to show you a video because we're out of time. Biology wants to get in here.
Well, they get in here until 6 and have a whole hour.
Oh, I have an hour. Look at that. Okay, I'm going to show you a video. And this video is important because this goes back to story making. So I hope you guys all have your questions. I hope you got these really good questions, okay? Because I'm going to come up with some really good answers. You guys don't look convinced. Anyhow. Oh, yeah. For those of you who came in late, make sure you fill out one of those drawing things. Even you people that are related to me can fill one out for the door prize. Everybody in this room, I encourage you to fill one out. Make sure you sign up the sign-up sheet, and we'll watch this video. It's 16 minutes. And eat all the food.
Montanza. Montanza. Literally translated from Spanish. It means a massacre, bloodbath, slaughter. It can be applied to animals as well as humans. In the U.S., it has come to mean the act of butchering, to slaughter livestock, in this case a pig, for its meat. But in New Mexico, when someone invites you to a montanza, it's much more than that. It's a communal gathering where an animal, usually a pig, is butchered and shared by everyone in attendance. These gatherings are held to celebrate births, baptisms, graduations, weddings. Even politicians have found a way to use them as ways to raise funds for their campaigns. The montanza that you're seeing here was held in memory of a great man, Larry Ortiz. Gatherings like these predate the arrival of the Spanish colonizers. The Rio Grande corridor stretches from its headwaters in the San Juan Range of the Colorado Rockies to the Gulf of Mexico at present-day Brownsville, Texas. Prior to European arrival, there were villages all along the river's route, just as there are today. The Spaniards reported that New Mexico had the largest number of sedentary Indians north of central Mexico. Larry was the first person to welcome me and my family to the valley when we moved here over 20 years ago. We lived north of the Pueblo of Isleta, on the dividing line between the old villages of Los Padillas and Pajarito, just off of Isleta Boulevard. At one time, this part of Isleta Boulevard was part of the Mother Road, Route 66. The history of this land has very deep roots, as do the people. Larry helped me to understand just how deep those roots are. He explained to me that the old families of the valley, Hinisaros, are Native American slaves held by the Spanish colonizers from the 16th to the 19th century. Many of these slaves would remain in bondage when Mexico and later the United States would govern over what is present-day New Mexico. Because of the sedentary indigenous population in this region, it became coveted by Spanish slavers as soon as they arrived. As part of their conquest, the Spanish needed slaves to build their churches and haciendas, and most of all, to populate the land with their offspring. Historians estimate that Genízaros accounted for as much as 1/3 of New Mexico's population of approximately 29,000 people in the late 18th century. That means nearly 10,000 people were being held as slaves by the Spanish colonizers. It was these people that built everything the Spanish had, their homes, their forts, and the churches. Because many were from here, they had a unique understanding of the land, wildlife, seasons, and how to survive in what can be a very harsh environment. It was this indigenous knowledge that enabled the Spanish to establish a foothold in New Mexico. The slave trade would evolve, including not just Hispanic traffickers, but horse-mounted Comanche and Ute warriors who raided the pueblos of Apache, Humanu, Pawnee, and other people, taking captives, many of them children plucked from their homes and sold in Spanish village plazas. The Spanish government tried to prohibit slavery in its colonies, but traffickers often labeled their slaves as servants or criados in the church records. This human trafficking would continue after the Mexican-American War, when the United States took control of much of the Southwest in the late 1840s. Rarely mentioned in history books, this slave trade of indigenous peoples was a significant contributing factor to the Pueblo Revolt of 1680, perhaps the greatest overthrow of colonial rule in all of the Americas by indigenous people. Most of the indigenous peoples of the province of Santa Fe de Nuevo Mexico, which was larger than current-day New Mexico, joined forces to kill 400 and drive out the remaining 2,000 colonizers. But the die had been cast, and the invaders would return to ultimately incite worse conditions upon the indigenous population, including slavery. The Roman Catholic Church played an active role in this business. In many instances, they would hold children captive under the pretense that they were being educated. When a purchaser for the child was found, they would pay the church for the child, under the guise that it was to cover the education the child had received. Many times these were girls who would become concubines in the Spanish household. The children she would bear oftentimes would take on the Spanish surname of their father, holding a higher social position within the social structure than their Native American mother. This is one of the foundations of why it was and continues to be better to self-identify with one's Spanish ancestors rather than their Native American ancestors, as well as establishing connections with Catholicism over indigenous traditions and beliefs. The U.S. government's 13th Amendment abolished slavery, and in 1867, Congress passed the Peonage Act after learning of many propertied New Mexicans, including Anglos, owning thousands of Indian slaves, mainly Navajo women and children. But scholars say the measure, which specifically targeted New Mexico, did little for most slaves in the territory. This was occurring simultaneous to Kit Carson's slash and burn campaign against the Navajos, resulting in 8,000 Navajos being incarcerated in a concentration camp at Bosque Redondo. 1 year later, in 1868, they would sign the treaty with the U.S. government establishing the Navajo Reservation and the Navajo people. Many Hispanic families in New Mexico have long known that they had indigenous ancestry, even though some still call themselves Spanish. The DNA of Hispanic people from New Mexico is often in the range of 30 to 40% Native American, according to Miguel A. Torres, a research technologist at Los Alamos National Laboratories and one of New Mexico's most prominent genealogists. He and other researchers cross-reference DNA tests with baptismal records, marriage certificates, census reports, oral histories, ethnological findings, land titles, and other archival documents. Hinasario and their offspring sometimes escaped or served out their terms of service, then band together to forge buffer settlements against Comanche raids, offering insight into how Indian captives sought to escape their debased status. Linguists trace the origins of the word Hinizaro to the Ottoman Empire's Janissaries, the special soldier class of Christians from the Balkans who converted to Islam and were sometimes referred to as slaves. Moses Gonzalez, an Hinizaro professor of architecture at the University of New Mexico, has identified an array of Hinizaro outposts that endure in the state, including the villages of Las Trampas, San Miguel Vado, and Abiquiu, where when you look at the cultures of these communities, you can see a seamless mixture between what the Spanish brought and what the Indigenous provided, creating an entirely new culture that is easily identified as New Mexican. Revelations about how Indian enslavement was a defining feature of colonial New Mexico can be unsettling for some in the state, where the authorities have often tried to perpetuate a narrative of relatively peaceful coexistence between the Hispanics, Indians, and Anglos. The history of the state of New Mexico, like the rest of the United States, has been whitewashed to portray the colonizers as saviors. The indigenous population is presented as less than human, savages, needing to be taught how to be human, and saved by Christ. This view of the indigenous people creates an inner conflict for the Hinasario descendants, who in the social and racial hierarchy of New Mexico are above the Native Americans, so long as they deny their indigenous ancestry. This social and racial hierarchy is a real thing, and has direct correlation for the jobs that natives can get, hence the creation of laws that mandate native preference for employment and contracts to perform work on Indian reservations in New Mexico. Prior to such laws, Native Americans found it difficult, to say the least, to find gainful employment. Oftentimes, they were relegated to doing the work no one else wanted to do for far less than their Anglo and Hispanic contemporaries would be paid. The same racial bias was found in the education system as well. Native American students were often taught trades like sewing, cooking, farming, and construction, rather than being encouraged to pursue more professional areas of study like the law, engineering, or medicine. When indigenous people did start pursuing college educations, the state universities and colleges in New Mexico refused to give them degrees. Instead, they were given certificates of attendance after completing the exact same coursework as their Hispanic and Anglo contemporaries. These practices greatly discourage Indians from pursuing professional degrees. Due to a lack of jobs on the reservation, many indigenous people were forced to leave and seek work in order to provide for their families. The Navajo Nation has averaged 75% unemployment for decades, with no real change in sight under the current policies. Despite these bleak realities, there are a growing number of Hinasario descendants that are embracing their indigenous background, knowing full well there is no economic, political, or social benefit for this. This does, however, challenge what the definitions of indigenous, Native American, and Indian are in New Mexico, raising questions of who gets to define who. Larry brought people together. He shared everything he had, and he passed these traits on to his descendants.
What? Oh no, shit, the big one's probably falling out.
I know. Are you making fun of me? Better not.
You used to have a big one.
Just the one. That's the only one I found in the shed.
I was teasing you, Juanita.
Huh?
I said I was teasing you.
What?
You used to have a big one.
She used to have a big one.
I didn't say what.
I'm like, what are you talking about? Hello? I forgot. Now Shane, when you do that, document that, those are homemade tortillas. Yeah, when you go to put this on social media, okay? Sarah, pick at it and see if there's enough salt.
Put it right there in the shade.
You need more salt. See if there's enough salt. Is there enough salt or you can't tell? I know you're just eating because you can. There's not enough salt. You need Put some more. Put some more. Right here. Right here. Get it. Thank you. Get it. It needs more.
Janessa's salt clan, so you can't trust her.
I love fucking salt too. She's a salt. I'm a salt fiend too. I fucking love salt. That's my shit.
I saw one. Bring them. There's two of them, huh? It's on the barrel. That's on there.
I couldn't find it. Hey God, there's so much books.
Take this.
Looks good, huh?
That they can't go out and make art and say that they're making Indian art. But it is a substantial change because if you understand that in 1868, when the treaty was signed with the Navajo people, there were more Navajos held as slaves than there were that came back here and formed this tribe. There were at least 10,000 Navajos held in slavery in 1868 that never came back. So a lot of those brown people that you see are your relatives.
We're good with the question.
They just never got a census number. And they didn't have a choice in the matter because they were stolen and they were taken. And that's a story in our family. That's what Manuelito used to do. He used to rescue these children. That's how he met Juanita. That's how he got Juanita. So as part of my research, what I did was, because Kluga, the clan that I come from, that is not a Navajo word. And there's 3 definitions for it, and nobody can agree on what it is. It's the only clan that goes back to one woman. So my mom, who's a molecular biologist and organic chemist, says, DNA never lies. Get your DNA tested. So I tested my DNA. And you know what my mitochondrial DNA is? Going back those 6 generations to Juanita? Peruvian. She was Peruvian. And if you look at the spindles that the Peruvian weavers use, they're just like the ones that Navajo women use. And Juanita was a master weaver, and the Peruvian weavers are master weavers. I was at the International Folklife Festival in Washington, and these Peruvian ladies blew me away on how much of what they did with their weaving was like what Navajo women do, which causes us to have to ask ourselves different questions. Questions like, how closely related are we to those people south of us? How much of what we know as our culture is the same as what they know as their culture? Because one of the things that I learned when I was at the International Turquoise Conference at the British Museum was all those mosaics that were being created in Mesoamerica, they are perfect examples of how this entire Turtle Island was connected from one end to the other. Most of the turquoise was mined in Nevada and New Mexico, but they had shells from both the Atlantic and the Pacific coast. They had ivory from Alaska, from walrus tusk. They had glues and stuff from South America. The trees, the wood that it was glued to, those big mosaics, were from trees from the rainforest. So that art that was being created, it couldn't be created if you didn't have this complete interconnectedness of indigenous people. It was an industry. We were these mass artists doing this amazing art. The only reason it didn't get destroyed was because they couldn't melt it down and put it in a ship and send it over. That's the reason why we don't have good examples of pre-Columbian gold and silver work, because we were metalsmiths long before. My mom likes to tease me because I do gold and silver work, right? Well, guess what Peruvian native people have always done? Some of the best goldsmiths in the world. Highly advanced techniques. It's in your DNA. So on that note, are we ready for questions? Don't be shy. Eat. The only way you can't ask a question is if you're eating.
If you have no questions,
This is your one chance. I'll answer any question.
you want to give him a round of applause first before we go to questions? Okay. Precious.
Hello. I felt like there was symbolism in a sense with the slaughter of the pig, and then gradually as a sense of seeing community and family towards the end, where you're like, oh yay, we're eating the pig. So is that something you wanted to portray at the same time, or is that was just what you were recording at the time? And
So I specifically chose to record a montanza for a couple of reasons. For one, when we lived in Moriarty, that's also a huge Henasado population. And the Chavezes, we lived adjacent to the Chavez Ranch. And they would have these huge parties, but none of them knew how to butcher. They used to always get my mom to go and butcher for them. So she would tell them, I'm only going to show you how to butcher if you learn. You have to learn how to butcher with me. So all those people in Moriarty on the Chavez Ranch now butcher like my mom, which is the right way. But so for me, butchering is one of those things where some people see it as grotesque. They see it as something that's offensive, right? Yeah. But for me, growing up, that was part of the process of sustaining my life. Because just like, this is one of the reasons why I want all of you to eat. Because you guys are all taking this beef. We're eating my dad's traditional food. My dad's from Northwest Arkansas, Eastern Oklahoma. That's the reason why you're having roast beef and mashed potatoes and everything, because he's a meat and potatoes guy. But all of that, within 24 hours, is going to become you. It's not going to be roast beef, mashed potatoes, and vegetables. It becomes you. And that's part of the message behind this film that I'm trying to get people to ingest on a subconscious level. Everything we put into ourselves is who we become. What we read, what we watch, what we listen to, the people we hang out with, that's who we become. The reason you are where you are today is because somehow, somewhere along the line, something guided you here. It's not an accident. There's no accidents. Does that answer your question?
yes, wonderful answer.
Thank you, Precious.
Thank you for your talk, Mr. Hendren. I'm wondering if you can say something about your goals for being here at Diné College this year.
Yeah, that's pretty easy for me because all my kids, except for my son, went to film camp in Santa Fe every summer. They used to have a film camp at the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture. And a lot of really renowned filmmakers taught those film camps. And I loved what my kids were learning, and they were always so excited. My daughter, Casey, she won Best of Show at the Santa Fe Indian Market in 2014 for one of her films. And what I came to realize was, as an artist making jewelry and painting and making sculptures, there was always this end goal of selling it. And once you sell your art, you no longer have control over it. It goes and it lives its own life. It was really hard for me in the beginning to sell a lot of my work, and I've been selling my work since I was 8 or 9 years old. Like I said, my dad sold art, he traded and everything, so I became a commodity maker, if you will, at an early age. And I always felt an inner conflict with making something and then turning it into money, even though it was a necessity. What film does, and this is one of the things that I hope that you guys get from this, film gives us power that we didn't have before, especially now that we have the internet. We can tell our own stories. We can tell our own ideas, how we see the world, what we want people to know about us. And nobody can censor us but us. And my goal here, the films that I'm making are what are called unauthored documentaries. Unauthored documentaries mean I'm not curating it. I'm not telling the person what to do. I'm not going to put it together in such a way that it's satisfying some sort of agenda. It's what that person is willing to share. And it's important to me because we have these programs coming now, PhD programs and everything, and Diné studies and stuff. And those people, hopefully some of you in this room who are going to be PhDs one day soon, can use those films and things like that as their resource material. Because films are resource material now. You can reference them. And I'm hoping that the films that I make, because they're going to stay here, they're going to become part of the archives. I'm hoping that some of you in here take that and build on that for future generations. Because the way I was always taught and the way I think is not how it's going to benefit me, but what am I leaving behind for those who come after me? That's the way I was taught to ranch. We were never in the cow business. We were always in the grass business. Because if you didn't take care of your country, you couldn't raise no cattle. And the ranch I grew up on right now has no cattle on it. Been 30 years of drought. Can't make money when there's no grass.
Shall we do the books now? Do you have any
Hang
other?
on. We got a question. We got a brave one.
Yay. Thank you, Dr. Whitstone.
You're welcome, Shaji. I just had a question on the auction business. I'm a certified auctioneer with Auctioneers Association of Alberta and Canada. And I always do Sunday morning auction at the Onion Lake Annual Powwow. And I see the auction business as a way to give back to the people. I don't take any money from it. So it's up to them, and I'll have, surprises here and there. They'll say, I made this with my own hands. Whatever you sold for it, I want you to have it. And that's like, the payoff, surprises here and there. I'm just wondering, one day I would love to see an auction house here on the res that gives back to the people. And I'm just wondering about the politics, who is going to get in the way? How do you see it running? Like, I'm looking at major sellers, major buyers, but at the same time, how do you keep it community level? How do you keep it humble as, to the community, the grassroots, and not let it get out of hand so that, people run away with the idea of the almighty dollar, How do you keep it real? So I'm just wondering, there's probably a whole nother session in this question, but I'm curious, because I'm like, I really want to help the people. I just don't know how or where to start.
This is like a loaded question. I could talk for 10 hours on this subject.
We only have 30
I'm
minutes.
going to tell you a story, but I want to tell you something first. I'm also an auctioneer. And I come from a history of auctioneers. Colonel Smith was my great-grandfather, and he had all the auction barns in western Arkansas and eastern Oklahoma. So I have a long line of auctioning. I also, and I dare any one of you in here to find out that I'm not, but I am the first Native American auctioneer to make $1.1 million in one night auctioning art. I told you I broke a lot of records. We just did that this past August in Santa Fe for the Institute of American Indian Arts. We raised $1.1 million for scholarships in one night. I only auction for free, and I only do it to raise money. I've never done it to put money in my pocket. Now, to answer your question, growing up, we were part of the Noshchiti Cattle Growers Association. It was a grassroots organization. My uncle Art Holian was very big on grassroots, and he said, you do everything from home first. You got to take care of things at home first, and then it's like a rock in a pond. Then the waves go out, right? He said, because if you don't take care of your home, you can't take care of anything else. So you can't, leapfrog yourself out here and say, I'm going to do all this and everything. Noshchiti Cattle Growers was a great organization, and it worked very well for a long time until we let outside influences begin to impact what we were doing. And part of that was because we don't work together well the way we should. And I'm going to leave that at that. It's something that we all need to work on together, okay? But I'm going to tell you a story. This is an important story. So that first ranch that I started on at Star Lake, they used to have a cow auction in the fall at Pueblo Pintada that was put on by the trader there. And he would invite all the Anglo cow buyers to come in and buy Navajo cattle, okay? And my mom was sitting there, and she's watching these cattle run through the ring, and they're calling out what their weights are and everything, and then they're auctioning them off, right? And she's watching these cattle go through, and then she says, whoa, stop, wait. That calf doesn't weigh 400 pounds, that calf weighs 650. My mom grew up with cattle. She knows what their weights are. She can tell you within 10 pounds what a cow weighs. She can probably tell you what it ate for dinner. But anyhow, the point is, she stopped this auction and she sent somebody to go buy 2 salt blocks because they're 50 pounds. And she said, put them on the scales. Prove to me that your scales are right. Shut the whole sale down. It caused a huge controversy because a lot of Navajos there didn't want to rock the boat. They were like, these white guys are going to leave. They're not going to buy our cows. Cut it out, Florence. Quit, What if they steal just a little bit from us? It's okay. We'll just steal from each other. That auction didn't last much longer after that because it killed their reputation. But my mom was responsible for marketing them cattle and everything. That's how I ended up in the world. She was prowling through cattle, which caused her to induce labor, and that's why I was premature. So a horse brought me into this world, and then as soon as she got me home, she had me on a horse. I've only had 2 years in my life when I didn't have horses. They were pretty miserable years. But anyhow, no more questions? Yeah.
Where? Okay, Mr. Morris.
Why is everyone looking at me? I'm joking. I grew up about a mile west of the corrals, Noshchiti. But this is not a question. I guess I just wanted to mention that Carla and I are starting to talk about possibly one day establishing a Diné Center for the Arts here. This is something that we had talked about before with other people, but it just never came to be. Something always got in the way. And I envision this Center for the Arts to include things like study of film production, performing arts, writing and performing our own plays. Orlando and I are both graduates of IAIA, creative writing. I'm fiction, he's poetry. And we came back here to teach. I've been here since 2000, so I've been here for like 25 years or so. And I helped establish a creative writing program, a BA program at NTU. And I came back here to do the same thing. I had to untangle a lot of bureaucracy here. It's, it's everywhere. But bit by bit, it's slowly coming to be again. And so I hope your talk, helps in some way to make that possible, to ignite some fires here, to see what's possible, right? I think now we need those kind of examples. I don't want to say role model, but those people that show us what can be done. And that's all I want to say.
Well, thank you. I want to say one thing because it's connected to what she asked about. So what you guys are talking about doing, that's the grassroots. It doesn't matter if it's an auction barn or an art group or whatever. It has to start, and I want you all to hear this and understand this. It all starts with each other. You help each other, you support each other, you lift each other up. You can go out there and ask people for money and everything. It doesn't make any difference if you don't have the foundation. Anything that lasts because it has a foundation. That's why this school is here. That's why it's endured all of the things that it's gone through, and that's why it's going to be here 50 more years from now, because it has a solid foundation. But that foundation is you guys. Every class that comes through here, you are the grassroots. It's just like every season we have new grass coming up. You guys are the new grass. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Jeff Foster, and about 2 years ago, I just recently got into silversmithing. I took a class here. This is where I first learned in the 108 class, and I took a 208 class. And then, so do you have a scale like on how would you sell a piece? Do you like, okay, all my supplies cost this much, and how much would I times that to sell the piece? So that's the part I kind of have trouble with, like, what the piece I've made, how much should I sell it for? Like,
you're not going to like my answer, but I got an answer for you. Because I learned it a long time ago. If I call my plumber to come unclog my toilet, he's going to charge me a $200 show-up fee. And then after that, it's $80 an hour.
Oh.
Okay? To unclog my toilet. Now, me as a jeweler, if I show up in my studio, I have a show-up fee. And then I have an hourly rate after that. And that hourly rate is based on what I need to make to keep my refrigerator full. Now, that's different for everybody. Because if I was in the trades and I started out, because jewelry is considered a craft according to the fine art world. We're not even art, we're craft, okay? That's the reason why you have so many people working in wholesale houses in Gallup and these different places. They pay them by the hour. They're just labor. That's how they look at it. So we got to kind of think of ourselves that way, okay? So you have a fee that you charge for your designs, for your ideas. You got to figure out what am I worth? What is my idea worth, okay? Call it $100, right? And then you know what your materials cost. Say you got $100 worth of materials, right? You got your idea cost, you got your material cost. Then you have everything connected to that. Your rent, your mortgage, your insurance, your electric bill, your consumables, your acetylene, saw blades, all of that gets factored in to each and every piece you produce. Because you need all of that to make that, right? A percentage of what those cost. You factor that in, okay? Then you figure out how much am I worth an hour, okay? If you're an apprentice at the pipe fitters union, you start out at 18 or 20 bucks an hour now, right? So be an apprentice, right? Say you're worth 20 bucks an hour. Now you got to keep track of how long it takes you to make that piece. This is the part where most artists fail. They don't keep good notes. They don't keep good records. Because you got to know how many hours you have in it, okay? That's your base price. Whatever that is, that's what you charge to break even, base price, okay? Now, if you're going to go into the marketplace to sell it, say you're going to do Santa Fe Indian Market, or you're going to do the herd or something, That's an additional cost. Now you're a salesman. What are you paying yourself to be a salesman to go out there and sell that stuff? Because that has to be added to the price of that piece, okay? You have fuel, you have hotel rooms, you have jury fees, you have entry fees, you have food, right? All of that stuff, now that cost has to be covered by that work that you're producing, okay? Now these guys are gonna come up and they're gonna say, all right, I wanna buy from you wholesale. The going rate is 50%. You know what your base rate is, right? They're gonna wanna give you half of whatever your retail is. So whatever your base rate is, you need to multiply that by whatever you feel comfortable with, because if you wholesale it, you're cutting that price in half. I have a rule. I don't wholesale for less than $20,000. They got to buy at least $20,000 worth of stuff from me to make it worth my while. And I only deal with 3 galleries. Answer your question?
I want to remind you, he's going to be teaching an 8-week class this semester. So it's NCA 134, and it's Navajo Arts and Philosophy. So I encourage you guys as students to spend more time with Shane, and we have him for an entire year, so take advantage of that. He's a wealth of knowledge. This is our last question for the evening. This is coming from Diné College's radio station, KXWR 92.1. So if you're in the Tsaile area, listen to our radio. Okay, the question is to you, Shane. What would you say to someone looking to highlight and work on Native American issues in the future, whether it be in education, the arts, healthcare, policymaking, etc.? With your experience, how can art help lead these different initiatives?
That's actually kind of easy, because I'll answer it a couple of ways. So the reason why I went to art school was because the advice my mom gave me was, she said, pursue something you're passionate about. As long as you're doing something you're passionate about, your life is worthwhile. Life becomes challenging when you're doing something you don't want to do. So it doesn't matter what you're pursuing. If it's Native American issues or whatever, if that's what your passion is, go for it. You might have your belly button close to your backbone for a while, you know, but that's the price you're going to pay. I know people in this room right now that are doing stuff because it's their passion. That's what they live for. That's what gets them up in the morning. So as long as you're pursuing your passion, that's the way you do it. And when you're passionate, you're going to attract other passionate people. Are we going to do a drawing now?
Yes, let's do the drawing. We have a hard stop at 6 of biology classes coming in here. So the first person who is going to win the book is Hendren from Tsaile. Yay! Come down. This is Misty, our former intern for the Mellon Foundation. So, are you sure? Okay, thank you.
Why'd you get in the drawing?
Okay, next person is Miranda James. Tsaile? Did I say that name right? Oh, Miranda. Okay. Okay, we'll save that for her. Okay. And next person is Alyssa Landry from Farmington. She's in her office, okay. All of our faculty members are winning, that's good. They can use it in their, okay. They can use it in their class. I just drew you again, Juana. Okay, Florence Hendren from Tsaile, Arizona. I guess your relatives are lucky.
We are lucky.
Good. Okay. Alexandra from Tsaile, Arizona. Woohoo! Thank you so much. Oh, well, that's good. Oh, you got your dinner right there, Shane. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ulrichsen. Oh. This one's blank. Oh, no. Is it Casper? Just kidding. Randy Joe from Lookachukai. Is that right, Randy? You bet. Okay. From LA. Here you go. Thank you for coming, Randy. Go take a picture with our celebrity. Haley Romero from Kithitsi Black Mesa Community. Am I saying that right? Did she leave? Okay, we're going again. You have to be present to win. Alyssa Foster from Pinon, Arizona. Alrighty. Irvin Morris from Tsaile, Arizona. Mr. Morris. You want to hand this to Mr. Morris? Where'd he go? Or did he leave? Oh, okay. Yeah, no. Carrington Romero from Black Mesa Community. Okay. Timothy Pisa from Hochi, Arizona. Oh, okay. Cool. Thank you for coming. Haley Benali from Chinle. Cool, we got students winning. Thank you, Haley, for coming. Hope you enjoyed the food. Okay. Jeff Foster from Burnt Corn, Arizona. Oh, hey, Jeff won. That was our last book. Thank you for coming and sitting the entire time and take some food.
Tim, give your book away.
Why? Oh, that's
my
that's
nephew.
Nice.
I think he knows what's in that book. And we'll get him another one.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thank you all for coming to our event. We appreciate you all for attending. And if you see the cowboy hat on campus, you know who he is now, and he's here for a year. Don't be shy. He's probably going to take you away from your classes for a whole hour, but it might be worth it.
Maybe. Oh, by the way, I have 2 PhDs, and I need a fence built. Post hole diggers. Have a good night, you guys. Take food with you.